what is the problem that needs to be solved?
Okay, welcome back to the Marketing Playbook, presented by Details Interactive. Here you'll take away 3 game-winning marketing plays every episode to take back to your team. I'm your host, Mark Friedman, and my career has been focused on direct-to-consumer marketing, direct mail, physical retail, and digital commerce. This is episode number 11, and today's guest is Kabir Shahani. Kabir is the CEO of Amperity. Amperity is the leading customer data platform allowing companies like Starbucks, Nordstrom, MGM Resorts, Alaska Airlines, and Dick's Sporting Goods, to name a few, build a unified and actionable 360-degree view of the customer. With Amperity, consumer brands can finally harness the power of their customer data. Before we get started, a quick thank you, as always, to Max Brandstetter of the Wild Business Growth Podcast for producing this episode. You can reach him at max@hippodirect.com to help bring your podcast to life. Let's open the playbook. Ready, break. Kabir, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Mark. Great to be here.
So, we're recording this in the early part of May 2020. We're going through this pandemic. Before we get, too deep into this, how are you and your family doing?
We're doing great, Mark. I appreciate you asking. My wife is, of course, being a saint and running a little school here with our 4-year-old and our 2-year-old, and we're fortunate that everybody's healthy and happy.
Well, that's good. I'm glad to hear that. And we'll certainly dive into Amperity. I want to start earlier on, but before we go too far back, how are your clients and your business being impacted by COVID?
Yeah, it's a great question. So certainly, given our focus on consumer businesses, more than 80% of our customers are directly impacted in a pretty meaningful way. And, I think I was a little bit surprised, candidly, with how this all took shape. Our first response when COVID broke was, of course, to ensure that, the safety and health of our employees was taken care of and secure. And we were aware of all the things that we needed to do, for our employee base. And of course, our priority immediately after that was our customers. And one thing that's been really a pleasure to have a chance to connect with our customers on is all the ways in which this is accelerating digital transformation. And as I'm sure you're keenly aware of, the need to be able to understand your customer, the need to be able to use that data in a way that's useful in driving the business is now more than ever. And so, we're trying our level best to help our customers, avoid some of the unfortunate situations that I think are unavoidable with furloughs and, the dramatic hits to, the P&L. And so really leaning in with tools and our time and our resources to help our customers in every possible way. And the impact is certainly there. To answer your question directly, we're seeing our customers, have significant impact. But every one of them, without exception, is approaching it as an opportunity. And so the impact to our business has been certainly manageable, fortunately, because of that. And we're thrilled to be able to have the level of partnership with these companies where we can really work shoulder to shoulder to ensure that we're bringing to life all the opportunity that comes from a crisis like this.
Right. So later on in the show, we'll talk about some of the tactics and the kinds of examples, perhaps, of how the digital transformation and the work that you do will be helpful to retailers. I think it's all kind of coming together nicely for a business that can bring the kind of functionality that you can. But before we do that, let's talk about your first story. I have a friend who does a podcast also, and he likes to jump on the beginning of his shows and talk about a guest's first story. Where did you grow up? Your upbringing. Talk about that for us.
Yeah, most of my upbringing was in Kansas City, Kansas. where my parents ended up about a year after immigrating to the United States. And, I think in many ways, a really classic immigrant story. My parents came here, had to start everything from scratch, get to know a literal lay of the land. And I was so blessed to grow up in a house where, we were very much a family that, took care of one another. And my parents, had a lot of ambition and worked super hard to make a life for themselves. I often reflect on the fact that I don't think my life or my career would be on the trajectory that it's been on if it weren't for my parents, not just because of, our values and our family, but just watching them work so hard to build a life in this country. I think people are often surprised when I share with them that there was a really big chunk of my childhood where I had both of my parents working two jobs. And so I experienced both of my parents working two jobs each for many years, just to be able to afford the lifestyle that, they so badly wanted for me as their only child. And, that in so many ways has, shaped as for many people, seeing how your parents show up and seeing how they bring their dreams to life, really does shape how you spend your own time and how you think about now with me having a young family, how I think about, the environment I want my kids to grow up in.
Yeah, that's a great story. It's interesting as I do these podcasts and talk to people, that first story is so often very different than what, has transpired for them in their career. Most of the folks, I don't know if it's just coincidence, but most of the folks that I've chatted with, didn't come from, extensive money, all, had to, their parents had to either work multiple jobs or both parents were working, one job and to find the money to put themselves through school. It really are great stories. So,
Yeah.
and where did you go to college?
I went to the University of Washington here in Seattle. So, fortunately, I think our family immigrant story is the one you want, which is, over time, my parents, climbed their way to, having a lifestyle that allowed me to experience all the things that, as a young kid you'd want to, and have all the opportunity. My dad transferred companies and got a really great job in the Pacific Northwest right before I started high school. And so I spent my high school years here in Seattle and went to school at the University of Washington.
And you studied at the University of Washington, what?
I studied a field called informatics, which, at the time was just sort of taking shape. I don't know how many schools today offer an informatics program, but I think when I started the program, I started in 2002 in that program. I think there were maybe 30 schools around the country with a dedicated informatics program. And I was really fascinated because it's where the idea of how human beings use information and consume information, coupled with the computer science required to actually bring data to life, actually came together. And so I was just, sort of hooked on the idea of, not surprising probably for you to hear, the idea of data and information and how people consume that was something I've been, fascinated with ever since.
Yeah, and I asked about it because I did not know what informatics was. I hadn't heard of it before. And so when you decided to study that, did you do it with some specific intention? Did you know that you wanted to start a business? Did you know that there were people out there, companies out there that were dealing with was it called big data when you were going through school?
Yeah, it wasn't called big data yet. We were probably, 5-ish years before big data. It was this idea maybe, but I don't think it was called that. And I certainly did not know I wanted to be an entrepreneur or start a company, and still don't really think of myself that way, which I'm sure we'll get to. I just love solving problems, and I get really fascinated by really gnarly problems. And a couple of the reasons I was really attracted to the field was, one, I knew I wanted to do something in technology. I'd always been, I was when I was in elementary school using bulletin board services, if you remember those, and the idea of calling into other people's computers and getting the news or playing games. I mean, it was really fun for me, just growing up and always having that fascination. And I actually didn't go down that path when I started college originally. I thought I wanted to be a physician and go down the path of being a doctor. And I actually shadowed a family practice doctor and had such a great experience and learned a ton, but found that the problem domain, at least, in the narrow view I was thinking about it in as a physician, was kind of an end by end problem. It felt like a fixed set of issues. And, at least at the time in family practice, it wasn't a ton of sort of solving new frontier problems. And that caused me to reflect on, my hobby and passion around technology and using computers. And I thought to myself, maybe I should pursue that as a career. And of course, this is sort of post the dot-com boom. And so there was a lot of attention on the internet and on computing, but it was before, large scale, cloud computing had really taken shape. And so there continues to, of course, in technology be, undefined problems to go solve. And I found that was really something that the informatics program in that field would allow me to spend my time really learning and working on.
Right. So before we talk about the fact that you wanted to be a doctor, you graduate, school, and you went directly into consulting?
I did. Yeah, I was recruited out of undergrad to a company that at the time was probably less than 1,000 people, and now is significantly larger, a company called Avanade. That's a Microsoft and Accenture joint venture. And, I had the opportunity to intern there when I was in college. And so despite doing the typical sort of college recruiting process and looking at a bunch of great companies that were hiring, the idea of familiarity and being able to work with a company that I had spent some time with was really appealing. And so I ended up starting my career with them.
All right. And so you said you don't view yourself as an entrepreneur, but I think the timeline is working in consulting as you just described, and then starting a business, right? Is that the timing of Aperture?
Yeah, I did a tour of duty after consulting where I worked at a startup, and that was kind of, I think, the first thing that was for sure where I got bit by the bug. I joined an early stage company that had maybe 5 or 6 people when I joined, and just watching how that process took shape and seeing how dynamic each day was, and how the problems were different every day, and the opportunities that you would have to think about and figure out how you were going to develop the company changed every day. And it was just so much fun and so fascinating that when the opportunity presented itself to start my last company, Aperture, in 2007, it was one that I just couldn't get out of my head. And so we jumped in and started that business, really, with the idea of, hey, there's a set of really interesting problems to go solve. And kind of really at that point in my life, I was probably 24 years old, really driven by the experience of it. And, felt like, hey, this is something that I think it would be fun to experience. And so let's go give this a shot and sort of see how it takes shape. And it certainly took a path, and as it has led to Amperity, took a path I certainly would not have predicted.
And, I've spoken to a lot of early stage companies and, talked to a lot of early founders in businesses. So what, you're doing your work in consulting, you wanted to be a doctor. So there was a bug that you had about the healthcare field. What were those problems that you thought needed to be solved that, got you to start Aperture?
Yeah, that certainly it was a scenario where it was clear that the business of marketing really had a lot of opportunity. Because we thought about the idea of like, hey, let's go start an enterprise software business. Very, 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 that's the biggest frame. Having not really dug into exactly what problem domain within enterprise software and exactly what industry, as we narrowed our view into marketing and we talked to folks in the field, it was really clear to us that people did not have a sense of, hey, who is my customer? They didn't have a sense of what marketing programs were working and what was delivering value. At the time, this is before this idea of multi-channel marketing. Email was just getting steam. And we heard from several marketers, hey, it's difficult for me to reach customers across multiple channels. And so funny enough, some of those problems I think many companies still grapple with, many of them have been solved through the run-up of marketing automation, which is fundamentally what that business was. But the idea of, building a system that could connect data, multi-channel action, and then insight and analytics so you could figure out what's working and what's not was kind of the core set that we started with.
And so this was in the healthcare space.
That's right. Yeah, we had this thesis that I think was partially right and partially wrong, which was, hey, let's go build really deep by industry rather than horizontal. And I think when you think about that market, there have been a number of multi-billion-dollar companies, or at least really large companies that got created, none of which was the outcome for us. Although we had some success, we didn't really deliver and create a business that had that sort of large scale. And I think we learned a ton by going really deep into an industry, and I think we were well positioned to take that business to other industries when we decided to sell the company. And I couldn't tell you what the future would have held. I don't know how successful we would have been in those other industries, although I like to think that we did have a lot of unique technology. The way the industry shaped up was those basic needs around how you actually deliver messages coordinated across channel was such a big problem and was so pervasive horizontally across industry that those companies, the Exact Targets, the Marketos, the Eloquas, those ended up being the winners in that space. Whereas I think we really focused deeply on the data layer and how you use data in those different channels. And in some ways, the concept was a little bit ahead of its time. And in other ways, I think our execution was not ambitious enough to have emerged as one of those marketing automation leaders.
Right. So you had an exit there, and tell me about you start this business. It's kind of your baby. Were you emotionally tied to it? Did the emotions didn't matter because you had a financial exit? How does that feel?
Oh, for sure. I mean, the emotional attachment is deep. It's real, and it's a process. And I think when we ultimately decided, we were in the fortunate situation where we had a really good business, and we were at a point in the development of the business. I kind of described the company actually really had two different lives. The first life, we actually bootstrapped the company for the first 3 years. The company was 6 years start to finish. In the first 3 years, we bootstrapped the business, and we were really just figuring things out. And we were really fortunate that we had built a highly differentiated product that delivered a lot of value. And so we had customers paying us real money that allowed us to have a small business. And the company was maybe 20, 25 people, and we'd never taken a single dollar of outside money and didn't have a single dollar of debt. And we realized there was this big market that we actually could go be a player in, which is when we raised venture capital. And so we ran 3 years as a venture-backed company. And that's really where we learned sort of the machinery around, like, how do we build and scale this organization beyond just being a product and how that we serve customers with that one product. How do we think about a business more holistically? And at the point at which IMS Health, who acquired the company, knocked on the door, we were running a good business and didn't feel like, oh, let's go sell. We didn't run a process. We didn't go, sort of think about proactively about selling the company. But when that happened, I think it caused us to step back and say, okay, we've now gone down the road for 6 years, 3 years in this venture-backed environment. Well, what does the next 10 years look like? What are the range of outcomes? What are the different trajectories that the business could take? And what are the issues that we face today in terms of the development of the business? And I think it was very much an intellectual decision to say, hey, there's an equal probability to us, creating more value, building a bigger company, as there is to actually the company seeing some challenges that would prevent us from being able to scale and grow the company. And so, the calculus, while not perfect, is basically, hey, what's the upside versus downside scenario? And for all of us too, as a pretty young team, it's, well, where we are in our careers. And I think when we took that sort of layer to it and said, hey, this is an opportunity for us to put a win on the board, sort of de-risk, the next chapter of our lives, it's something that we should, be seriously considering. And our board of directors at the time was so supportive and, was very comfortable either way, and basically said, hey, we think this is a deal worth doing. We also are completely fine to keep building the business if you guys want to do that. And so we ultimately ended up deciding to do that deal, of course.
How did that first year go after you took the venture capital money? So year 4, let's say.
It was, I have to say, like, it was really great. I'm somebody who's motivated by learning, and the amount of learning in that first year, I mean, man, we didn't have a board meeting like before venture capitalists showed up, right? And so just the idea of having like governance and looking at the metrics that matter, at a high enough level, it was really nice to be able to shift from, I would say, again, we were hyper focused on product and hyper focused on customers, and sort of the one-to-one relationship between like building something for a customer. You can't scale that. It's a good kernel, but if you can't build the mechanism around that, you can't build a long-term sustainable business. And so, by working with, the team at Madrona, who's not only backed Aperture, but is, the first investor here at Amperity, and, the other investors involved, it really allowed us to build that muscle, and we learned a ton, not just that first year, but, throughout, the coming years.
Congratulations. That's a good story. So, you take some time, I imagine, and then ultimately you found Amperity. So maybe give us a perspective. One of the things I would say, I hear the term, I've been doing this for a while. I hear the term customer data platform, and, the hair on the back of my neck, stands up.
Totally.
And now, since I haven't had a haircut in quite some time, there's a little bit more hair. But,
right.
What do you believe that the CDP is, and how do you position the service and the capabilities that you bring to your consumer? How do you describe it?
Yeah. So CDP is a complex ecosystem, and I'll start by saying it's just that. To me, it's an ecosystem. It's a set of capabilities. And I think one of a couple of the bigger challenges that we've had in the CDP market, and I can maybe take you back to the founding story in a minute to bring it to life. But the big challenge one is you have a lot of companies that have pivoted into the space versus thought about the problems in sort of a first principles ideas, as we describe it internally. And so when you're taking a technology that's built to solve a different set of problems than the ones that the customer is actually experiencing, and you have to try to shift that technology in, I think it's really hard to do that, and creates a ton of confusion. I think the other thing that we've learned as we've developed the business is that it's not just one thing. To actually deliver on a truly customer-centric model as a consumer business, you need more than just a customer 360 and orchestrating that data, and being able to do multivariate testing and sort of all the things that come with being able to work end to end with any particular in any particular consumer business, and how you bring that to life. And so for us, we looked at the problem as, hey, what's the core issue, when we started the company, that these large companies are facing, and even mid-size consumer businesses are facing, in terms of being customer centric and actually delivering messaging that's personalized and relevant, delivering offers that are personalized and relevant that make sense. And it turns out that the problem, wasn't the personalization engines. They were actually really good. It wasn't the email tools or the orchestration tools. They were all actually quite strong. The issue was the underlying data. And there were fundamental data challenges. For example, I've got 50 different places where quote unquote customer data lives, but it actually doesn't all show up as customer data. It actually might look like clickstream data, as an example, or it might look like transaction data, as an example. And so step one was, how do we help these different companies transform what is fundamentally transaction data into something that looks and feels like customer data? One of the other challenges in doing that we realized is that you actually don't have a way to connect those data sources. So the techniques and tools being used to connect these data sources and continue to be in many cases archaic, and don't embrace the fundamental uncertainty in that data.
Meaning there's nothing to stitch disparate data together and say that it's all Mark Friedman.
That's exactly right. There isn't a linking key. And the way, because, to your question earlier about big data, because for so long, big data wasn't really a thing. And because we didn't have so many channels in which we were engaging with customers, and we didn't have the frequency and volume of a dynamic customer landscape, you could get by without being able to connect all the different versions of Mark Friedman or all of Mark Friedman's behavior, regardless of if you had the perfect linking key in all these different places. And fast forward to when we were starting to investigate the problem domain in late 2015 and early 2016, the problem had gotten out of hand. And you had leaders at consumer brands, unequivocally saying, we have way more data than we can actually get our arms around. The number of times I heard, a CMO say, I've got a bunch of data just collecting dust. I've got it coming in, but I don't know what to do with it. I can't harness it. You'd be surprised how many times that just continued to come up, or maybe you wouldn't be.
No, I wouldn't be. I absolutely would not be.
And so we said, hey, well, if there was a way we have to actually invent a new way to stitch customer data. We have to be able to invent a way that's data first, traverse all of that information, and generate a linking key, not look for an existing linking key, and use modern techniques to do that. We weren't even sure if the techniques existed. I'll never forget when we raised our first round of financing when we started the company, and we were so fortunate to have such enthusiastic investor support to go take this on, that we raised $9 million the day we opened the company. Like, nothing existed. It was, a few of us and $9 million and a whole bunch of problems to go solve. And I'll never forget my co-founder, who's our CTO, telling our early investors before that money wired, he said, number one, we're not sure that we're the ones to solve the problem, that we're going to be able to figure it out. And two, we're not even sure if the problem is solvable. And so we need to spend a bunch of time bottoming out on that. And it was so great to have that sort of culture where we could really have the space to go solve the problem. And I credit our success today with having the opportunity to really think critically about what is the problem that needs to be solved. And that led us to, of course, a lot of the academic research that we ended up commercializing, which we now have 3 patents on, awarded by the USPTO, because we could really go and build unique technology to solve a problem that hadn't been solved.
The devil's in the details. You've probably heard that phrase time and time again in your professional life. Projects get started with great intentions, but you no longer have the time to pay attention to the little things that can make the difference between success and failure. At Details Interactive, you can discuss your business with a seasoned direct-to-consumer marketing executive who has helped launch and grow web businesses and integrate multi-channel marketing initiatives. Learn more at detailsinteractive.com. What's been your experience? You felt like there was a problem to be solved. And when you called on customers, do you have a sense even today that the prospects understand what problems that they have? Are they that introspective at this point, or do they not even know that they have a problem?
They absolutely know they have a problem. The question is, how is it defined and in what part of the organization? And I think the part that's been really fascinating for me is there's been zero debate about the fact that, hey, we actually don't have a customer 360. We can't connect all this data. We can't use it for personalization at the rate and pace at which we want. Like, there's actually not debate around that. I think the questions become, well, why is that the case? And what problem do we need to go solve to unlock that value? And I think different companies are at different levels of maturity. One of the really interesting artifacts of our business and how it's come to life is when I think about a lot of these large household brand name customers that we have, the person on the other side that actually said, I need to use this technology, I need to bring this into the organization, they've actually been trying to solve the technical part of the problem for a long time. And so they immediately recognize the fact that, yeah, the reason I can't do those things, the reason I can't do personalization at scale, the reason that my analytics aren't accurate is because I have all this data I can't connect and I can't trust it. And I don't know that it's not precise enough. And so when we came in and we could describe and actually demonstrate a technology that could solve the fundamental technical challenges, the aha moment is there.
When you go in and you have these conversations, I've in many companies that I've worked in, there's my best friend usually is the IT guy, me being the marketing guy or
Yep.
marketing person.
Yep.
But the IT person, but at the end of the day, they are looking at it from an IT perspective. I'm looking at it from a marketing perspective. Oftentimes it's not consistent. So when you're talking
Correct.
to these folks, are you selling into the marketing people, or are you selling to the IT people, or both? How does that work?
Yeah, it's certainly both. And I think, Mark, the success you've had in your career is because you have thought about those IT partners as real partners in solving the problem with you. Unfortunately, that's not the case across many organizations, as you know. And so you have these organizational silos. What I've learned is it's not that way by design. It's not that way because people want it to be that way. It's because everybody has really different perspective and they see different parts of the problem manifest in different ways. And one of the most exciting things about building this business has been the opportunity to bring these teams together, and to bring everybody. And it's amazing to me how often we'll be with a customer, prospective customer, mostly prospective customer, and they'll say, "Yeah, this is the first time that we've actually all talked about this."
Yeah,
Or
the
that
first
we've
time they all sit in the same room at the same time.
That's right. That's right. Now, that's becoming less and less common of something that I'm hearing, because I think, especially now in the age of COVID, everyone's being forced to be hyper customer centric. And so there's more companies that, over the last 18 months even, that have launched a, customer 360 or customer hub type initiative than ever before. That number just continues to grow. And so I would say that there's significant recognition of the problem by all those different stakeholders. And our job is really, we think about it in two ways. One is, bring those teams together, as I talked about, but also have capability to enable each of those companies to be successful. That's another big piece of it. And as I think about how our business has developed and how our capabilities have developed, we've really grown the organization to be able to not only serve that core underlying data challenge, but as you know, we've now launched capability around how we deliver insights and analytics and how we help customers orchestrate data to all those downstream tools, which has been another sort of part of the CDP definition that's come to life over the past couple of years as this market has taken shape.
Yeah, that's a good segue into the question that I was going to ask you. It's one thing to have technology. It's one thing to be able to stitch all the data together. That's only half the story, though, right?
Yep.
The other half is, all right, now that the IT guys have done what they've done and worked with you, how do I, as the marketer, take the information and actually put it into programs and actually, make it useful to drive revenue? After all, that's what this is about, is to drive revenue and better service my customers. So, I've always struggled with that part of the CDP into marketing efforts and creative. How do you guys help?
Yeah, it's a great question. There, as you said, there's two sides to it, or two pieces of the puzzle. One is having the right capability for each of those different parts of the business. And so, when you work with Amperity, we now have capability that's really focused on what we call the quote unquote IT pro, right? And what are the sort of data engineering pieces versus the tooling that's available to the insights and the analytics teams that are looking at that data and making decisions with that data, versus the marketing teams that are looking at those analytics and those decisions and then thinking about how I actually bring those to life in my programs and orchestrate that data. And so there's actually different technology all in the same underlying product available to each of those different teams, which is one of the ways I think we've been able to help our customers have a lot of success. The other is, to your point, well, how do we think about organizational change management? How do we think about aligning all these different efforts that we've had in our business over the years and over the journey we've been on to be able to get to this nirvana state of how we engage with our customers and have them actually make sense in a roadmap? And so one thing that we've done that I'm so happy that we had the opportunity to invest in this early was build a whole team of subject matter experts that not only work with our customers, actually develop frameworks for our own internal teams to use, our customers also bring to life. One example of this is something we call the journey to customer centricity, where we actually have a whole framework that we've developed that our team goes in, and not only do our customer success managers, but these subject matter experts work with our prospective customers and our existing customers to roadmap out how you actually go on that journey to customer centricity based on, number one, your own organizational culture and your own organizational dynamics. Number two, of course, what your goals are and what's going to move the needle the fastest. What investments you've already made, right? We don't want people to just go and invest in areas where they don't need to. What products do you have today that work well that you want to make sure you keep versus areas that you want to make changes? And thinking about the use cases, right, that matter, and to have both the tooling and the customer community that we have to leverage and draw on for sort of the wisdom of that group, but also having brought experts like the gentleman who is the head of data and CRM for L'Oreal Group, or an incredible leader, a woman who led all of customer experience at Alaska Airlines, or the SVP of data and analytics at Gap, all of which were on our team full time now, actually helping these customers. A gentleman who brought to life Customer 360 at Best Buy, right? Just really, really great domain expertise and practical experience, combined with what we've learned across our customer community, combined with our technology and our tools, makes for a really powerful approach to helping customers actually bring this to life.
That's a great story. So you're CEO. How do you describe the role that you play in your business today?
Ooh, man, it changes. It changes all the time. It's probably one of the things I love about it. I always say, like, I was our first tester and QA person. Certainly, having to play the role of first salesperson, and so I think my job is to go and find the net new jobs that have to get done, try to do the best I can, knowing I'm not an expert in any of them, and then recruit and develop the expertise to be able to go and be best in the world at that. And so I'm actually in the midst of one of those transitions right now, which is so exciting because we've got a phenomenal leader who's come in to run our go-to-market across marketing, sales, customer success, our partnership motion, and sort of really how we think about taking, what I obviously I'm biased, but I feel like is super unique technology, a really high quality product, and really great customer execution, and scale it out. And so our organizational sort of priorities, today at 150 plus people is really different when, I think a year ago we were half the size. And so the priorities change, the way, the places I need to spend my time change. And of course, when you can bring in partners and leaders into the company, that shifts my time to yet another place. And so I'm in the midst of kind of recasting where, my time can be focused more on helping shape the vision in the market and spending more time market facing than I've been able to over the past year.
Right. And, we kind of come full circle here. We started off with, the COVID crisis, the work that you guys are doing, the customers that you have. We talked about digital transformation probably needing to be accelerated. Is there anything in particular that, you guys are doing that, when this all started and you saw the landscape requiring change, is there any one or two things that stood out and you said, we're ready for this?
Yeah. There's a couple. The first is we tried to surface and continue to surface a lot of our aggregate learning. And so you visit covidtracker.amperity.com. We've actually built a set of data-driven reports that are just kind of helping customers understand the trends that we're seeing based on anonymous data that we look at and that we study, constantly. And so making that learning, that insight available to the market. And the other is where we're seeing best practice. And so we've actually had a really powerful set of weekly roundtables with executives across, dozens and dozens of all well-known consumer businesses, having a safe space to come together and share ideas and talk about things that are working and things that aren't working, and harnessing the value of that community. And so the ability to take, the community we have and the learning that we're all developing together, along with the fundamental capability of, for example, how do you really turn up owned media channels like push and email versus paid media, is a great place to get efficiency right now. And it's a use case we've helped our customers on for a couple of years now since we've been in market. And so now to bring that to life in a way that drives real cost savings has been really satisfying.
Yeah, that's great. I'm a big baseball fan. Baseball is a 9-inning game. What inning would you say you guys are in at Amperity?
To me, I think we're in the second inning. Like, first inning was, we were on the field and, we're out there and we know we're playing ball. But we're super early days. We just, we made our first acquisition late last year. We've got, expanded capability now. We've got a lot of ambition around how we serve our customers. And so we got a long road ahead. It's a big game ahead for sure.
Good for you. Well, now I'm going to mix the metaphors here. The marketing playbook kind of talks about football, coming off my baseball question. At the end of these shows, we do a 2-minute drill. I ask each guest the same 7 questions. So can I ask you those questions? You ready?
Please. I'm ready.
All right. A brand that you admire or that inspires you?
Starbucks.
Okay. Favorite app on your phone?
Email.
Oh, I figured you'd just tell me Starbucks since you.
Right.
The last website other than Amazon that you shopped from?
Busted Tees.
Busted Tees?
I think is it called Busted Tees? Let me see. I'm
what
wearing
is that?
One of their t-shirts. It's a t-shirt site.
T-shirt? Okay.
Yeah.
Cool.
Actually, wait a minute. It might not be called Busted Tees. It might be called something else.
All right. We don't want you to strip for the show. Something that you're not good at, but that you wish that you were.
Playing piano.
Okay. Charitable organization that you're passionate about.
Fred Hutch Cancer Research Center.
Okay. If you had one superpower, what would it be?
Not sleeping.
Not sleeping. So you want to have 24 hours in the day to do everything you want to do.
That's right. That's right.
And other than family, what's your most prized possession?
Time.
Okay. Yeah, I've heard that one before too.
I'm sure.
Where can people find you on social media if they want to talk to you or they want to talk to folks at your company about how Amperity can help them in their business?
LinkedIn is great. Love using LinkedIn.
Okay, great. Well, look, this was really interesting. I think the entire landscape of CDPs, continues to be a really important place for businesses, retailers to be involved with. And, the fact that you guys are growing so fast has to do with your leadership and the need in the space. So thanks for doing this for me, and look forward to catching up with you down the road soon.
Really enjoyed the conversation, Mark. Thank you.
That's it. Today's game ball goes to Kabir Shahani for coming on the Marketing Playbook. To me, today's 3 game-winning marketing plays were as follows. Number 1, the American dream is alive and well. The story about Kabir's parents coming to the U.S. and each working 2 jobs so that they could provide him the quality of life that would allow him to go through college and found 2 companies is inspiring. Hard work, dedication, and a vision are all required to achieve your success. Number 2, businesses cannot operate successfully with silos. As we heard, many businesses still have IT and marketing working in sort of parallel play mode, moving perhaps towards similar goals, but not always aligned. Break down those barriers, identify the problems, and establish goals to solving those problems. And number 3, customer data is complicated. Brands oftentimes have numerous sources of customer data that cannot be linked to give that 360 view of the customer. Customer data platforms can help you execute on this, but that's only a piece of the puzzle. Be certain that you know how to interpret the data and then how best to use it to drive revenue in your business. Thank you, Playbook marketers, for listening to another episode. If you want to check out more pages of the Marketing Playbook, make sure to subscribe on your favorite podcast spot and leave us a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts. You can also follow us on Twitter at DetailsInteract and learn more at detailsinteractive.com. Until next time, the devil is in the details.